Students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be graphing secant and cosecant functions, and you will be able to work on 10.9. Today, students will be able to graph secant and cosecant functions. We'll be using our circle unit, and the secant of theta is equals to 1 divided by cosine of theta. So the first thing that I'm going to start doing is by graphing the cosine that you already did before. But I want you to show so that you can see or compare them. Okay, so if you recall, for the cosine, it starts at 1 and then it goes to 0, then -1, 0, then +1, 0, and so on. Okay, so our cosine curve would be something like this. Though we didn't work with the negative values in here, it would just continue to form the same curve, okay? But on the other side, so it would be 0, +1, and so on. And so that will be our cosine curve. Let's start looking for the values for the secant. And one thing that you need to see is that the secant in the denominator, it has the cosine. I know that some people will say, oh, secant goes with sine, but no, it's cosine, okay, with the opposite kind of. And so we're going to start with 0. If the radians is 0, then we divide 1 by cosine. Cosine values, remember that is the x value, and so it's going to be over 1, and so the answer would be 1. Okay, so that will be your y value. Remember, for all these trigonometric ratios, the x is cosine, the y is sine. Okay, now in here, pi over 2 is the 90-degree angle, pi over 2, and so again, 1 divided by the cosine would be 0. So remember that we cannot have a 0 in the denominator, because if you divide 1 by 0, or anything divided by 0, will always give you an error message. Okay, so we put undefined, and so just put a u in here. Okay, for pi is right here, so it's 1 divided by cosine of pi will be -1, and positive divided by negative is -1. Okay, so in here we're going to put -1. 3 pi over 2 is down here, and so it's 1 divided by 0, which is equals to, again, we cannot divide by 0, so it's undefined. Then 2 pi is right here. Remember that we're going by the 90-degree angles. And so it will be 1 divided by cosine of 2 pi, which is 1, and that's equals to +1. 5 pi over 2 is like saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's right here. And so the value is 0, so it's 1 divided by 0. 0 is the cosine of that point, and so it's going to be undefined. And so we just put a u in here. Now when we go negative, it just means instead of going counterclockwise, we're going to go clockwise. So -½ pi would be just going 90-degree angle right here, and so it's going to be 1 divided by 0, because that's the cosine, so 1 divided by 0, and so that's going to be undefined. And we just put a u in here. -pi would be right here, so it's 1 divided by -1, and that's -1, and we put it right here. So those are the critical points, and what you're going to do is just plot each point. So -pi, it's right here, that's -1. So you go down here. The next one, -pi/2, is undefined. And if you recall from previous lessons, undefined, when it's about the slope, you graph it this way. So it's just a vertical line. And basically, it means that my graph is not going to touch on that line. So I'm just going to draw that vertical line on -pi/2. For 0, the answer is 1. So 0 is right here. The point is at 1. Pi/2, it's undefined again. So we draw the vertical line, the undefined line. For the next one is pi -1. So it's right here. If you notice, it's touching all the lowest or highest points, right? For the next one is 3pi/2. So again, it's undefined. We draw our vertical line or asymptote. 2pi will be 1, so right there. And 5pi/2 will be undefined once again. Whoops. And so from there, we just graph that way, but I think I want to show you at least a couple of non-critical points, so pi/4 and -pi/4, so that you can see where these points go. So let's do pi/4. For pi/4, for the secant of pi/4, it's right here. So that point will basically go in here, around here, pi/4. Okay, in the middle of 0 and pi/2. And so I'm going to show the working here. It's going to be 1 divided by, remember that the secant is 1 divided by the cosine of that angle in radians. So it's going to be, the cosine will be square root of 2 divided by 2. Okay, and so the first thing that you want to do, depending on the calculator that you have, it's a little tricky. So it's better to just divide the square root of 2 by 2 and have that in here. And it's going to be rounded, so it's not going to be perfect. And again, it depends on what calculator you have. You might have this one or this, something like this one. Okay. But then this one, it's a little easier if you use your parentheses to work with. And also the second one. But let's do that first. Square root of 2 divided by 2. So for this one, you would do square root of 2 divided by 2 equals. It's point. And I recommend that you use as many as possible, but and that's going to make your answer a little closer. So maybe 3 decimals. And so after that, you clear it and you're going to put 1 divided by 0.707 equals, and you're going to get 1.41. I'm rounding 1.40. It's fine. So that will be the value in here between this. So it's 1. Let me put it right here. 1.4. We'll just go with 1.4, which is close to 1.5, right? For the other one, which is going to be around here, -pi/4. Well, for that one, you will go negative, means clockwise. 1/4 would be this right here. And if you notice, the value for cosine is the same, so you're going to get the same value, and it's going to be positive even if you're going negative, because the cosine is the x value, which is positive. Okay, so it's going to be exactly the same, which is 1.41 or 1.4 is fine. Okay, so for that, if I go pi/4, that's going to be 1.5 is here, the 2 would be here. So 1.4 or 41 will be around here. And the same on the other side. And so that's just to show you that this graph will actually go up approaching that asymptote but never touching it. And we're going to do the same thing over here, approaching but never really touching it. Okay, and that's going to be the same for the other ones, because we already graphed the other ones. We just go and around here to guide ourselves, and we go up and basically that will be the graph that you're going to have. Now in here you can find this will actually be 3 pi over 4, or 3/4 of pi. If you want, you can do the same thing that we did here. You've been working with finding or dividing these values, so I think you can just do a couple of them, and it's probably going to be negative 1.41. And again, it's just to guide ourselves. And so you have it there. In here it would be same. So this is -1, -2, so about here. And you open your parabola going down. The other one would be around here, so don't touch it, just approach it, more or less. Okay, so those will be just without the yellow line. That will be your secant of theta, the graph for your secant of theta. Okay, and before we go to the cosecant, I just want to show you really fast how you would do it in this calculator. I'm gonna do it slowly, but I'm not gonna write it. But what you have to do is 1 divided by, open 2 parentheses, square root of 2, close one of the parentheses, divided by 2, and close the parentheses and enter. And if you see, it's 1.41, which is what you got by doing step by step with this other calculator. Okay, so basically those are the steps. You put 1 divided by, you open 2 parentheses, and it takes the square root of 2 first, you close it, and then divide that by 2. Okay, so that's why you have to do it step by step on this one, because it's not a scientific calculator. Plus, you're not closing parentheses because we don't. Okay, let's go to cosecant. And for the cosecant, co sounds like cosine, but no, it's cosecant goes with sine. It's the inverse of sine of theta. Okay, and so because of that, we're going to graph first our sine graph. Remember, from 10.7, our sine graph would start at 0, then it's +1, then 0, then -1, then 0, then +1, and so on. And on the other side, it will follow the same pattern. Okay, so for me, it's easier to just grab it from the lowest and highest point and then just drag it. Okay, so the same for the other side. We follow the pattern. So in here it will be -1, then 0, then +1, then 0. Okay, so again, get it from the highest points and drag it. Highest points and carry it over. Okay, and for the, okay, so for the cosecant, some people would assume that is the inverse of cosine, but no, it's the inverse of sine, so the opposite. And so we're starting by finding some values. Remember that the negative is clockwise and positives are counterclockwise. So let's start with this one. -1/2 would be going half, which is 90-degree angles. Each 90-degree angles is a half. So going back, the negatives would be 1 divided by the sine. Remember that the sine is the y value, so it's -1. And so 1 divided by -1 is -1. That's for -1, 1/2 of pi, not. So this is the value for this one. Sorry, this is -pi, so it's going all the way over here. So it's going to be 1 divided by 0. The sign is 0. And so we can never have a 0 in the denominator. That's going to be undefined. Okay, so let me take this out, and that's going to be undefined. This was the -1/2. It's only this one right here, so that is 1 over -1, which is -1. 0, that's the 0 radians, so it's 0 divided by 0, which is equals to, what is 0 divided by 0? So 0 divided by 0 equals, same thing, you still get error when you divide 0 by 0. Okay, so undefined once again. And we just put a U. For pi over 2 is here, or 1/2 of pi, and it's 1 divided by the sign, which is 1, and so that gives us +1. Pi, it's right here, it's 1 divided by 0, and that's undefined again. 3/2 of pi, or 3 pi over 2, is 1 divided by -1. Remember that the sign is the y value, so it's -1. And I keep repeating this so that you keep remembering. It gets easier and easier. The more you repeat it, it's easier and easier. 2 pi, it's right here. Sign is the y value, so it's 1 divided by the y value, which is 0, and so that's undefined. 5 pi over 2, or 5/2 of pi, it's like going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/2. It's the same as 1/2. So it's 1 divided by sign of pi over 2 is 1, and that gives us +1. So now we have our critical points. And so for -pi, it's u. -pi, it's u. So that's going to be our vertical line. -pi, you get the vertical slope, meaning the asymptote, which is you approach it but you don't touch it. Okay, and for the next one, you have -pi over 2, it's this on x, -1, it's right here. Oh, again, we're going to get the highest and lowest points, but what happened? You just go away from x when you're graphing. Okay, 0, you get u. That's another asymptote. Pi over 2 is 1, right here. Pi, it's undefined, so another asymptote. So you can guess that it's just going to be touching the highest and lowest points for our graph, but then the asymptotes are going to be on, like in here, it will be the other one, every 4 squares that we have in here. 3 pi over 2 is -1. That's the low. 2 pi is undefined, and no wonder I was confused when I was doing this part. So in here you have, if you notice, in here you have pi, just keep 1, and then you have 2 pi. So the 5/2 would be actually in here. 5 pi over 2, or 5/2 of pi, it's right there. Okay, so for 2 pi is undefined, it's right here. And for 5 pi over 2, or 5/2 of pi, you have 1. So it's right there. And in here, it will be similar, where you just go away from the cosine because it's the reciprocal, not the inverse, the reciprocal. And let's find, but now let's do it in the negatives. Instead of going one positive, let's go down here so that I can show you. So if we want to do this one, it will be -pi over 4. And for this one, it will be -3 pi over 4. Okay, so we'll do those 2 points so that you can see the work. You don't have to do it for the other ones. You can just guide yourselves with the values that we get here. And so that will be somewhere in here, negative pi over 4 and negative 3 pi over 4. Okay, so let's do negative pi over 4. And so the cosecant of that angle will be negative, goes down here 1/4, which the sign will be negative square root of 2 over 2. So 1 divided by square root of 2 over 2, but it's negative because it's the y value. And so remember that we put the 1 over 1 and we just multiply. The outer is going to be, well, first of all, positive divided by negative is negative, and then 1 times 2 is 2, divided by 1 times the square root of 2 is square root of 2. And in here, you can simplify it, or you can just start dividing, okay? So let's use this calculator. Negative 2 divided by the square root is second function of, that's where the square root is, not with the x but without, and then you put the 2, and in here you want to close it or not, it's okay, and you get negative 1.41. okay, so that's to guide us again. Now let's do the other one. Cosecant of negative 3 pi fourths, or negative 3/4 of pi, whichever you prefer. And so for the negative 3/4 of pi, you go negative 1/4, negative 2/4, negative 3/4. So it's this value right here. Again, it's 1 divided by the sign. The sign is always the y value, which is negative square root of 2 over 2. If you notice, 1 divided by the square root of negative square root of 2 over 2 is the same, so you are going to end up with the same value, negative 1.41. okay, and so that's going to be the value here, negative 1.41 and negative 1.41. So if those are the critical points, this would be negative. So if that's the critical point for negative pi over 4, would be negative 2, would be around here. See, this halfway is 1.5, but negative, right? Negative. And so about here, 1.41. So those are going to guide us, okay? So now we can just graph through those points, approaching the asymptotes, but not quite touching. Whoops. And remember to try your best here. In here, we already did one that goes up. So again, we'll guide ourselves with those 1.4. Something like that. Oh, the asymptote will be here, so that wouldn't be crossing. Okay, it should be more this way. For this one, again, we can just guide ourselves by copying. Don't touch, approach, don't touch. And for this one, again, somewhere there. And for this last one, somewhere around there. And that's it. So that's the graph for the cosecant. Hope it was helpful. It would greatly appreciate it if you can support us. You can subscribe around here. The whole playlist for this unit is around here of how to work with the unit circle, and the next video will be around here. Now you're able to do 10.9, but before, if you can just share a thumbs up with us and have fun.